Welcome to episode 138 of the Ceres podcast. In this episode of Read the News, we have my good friend and previous Young Fish Frier winner, Zohaib Hussain from Zero Plus Fish Bar in Cardiff. If you're not sure of what we're doing with this format, think of Sky News or BBC News, where the presenters and the guests discuss the morning papers. In these Read the News episodes, we would discuss articles written and posted on our newsfeed. But fear not, we haven't disbanded with the original format, but we like to add something else to the mix, otherwise life is boring, right? If you want to hear something slightly different, go back one episode to 137 and you'll hear me being interviewed by Thomas Doran. If you want to know more about Zohaib Hussain, then go back and listen to episode 11. We have plans to make Zohaib a regular, and all the others that have recently been on to Read the News. If you look at your podcast player, you'll see that we just released 4 episodes at once, and we have many more planned in the pipeline. Have you visited our new website, ceres.shop? If you're listening to me right now, then it's probably good that you jump over to our website and see what we do. The business of Ceres is keeping fish and chip shops, pubs, restaurants, street food vendors, and hotels and many, many more stocked up with batter mixes, super absorbent cloths, gravy mix, Louisiana seasoning, deep fryer cleaner, natural degreaser, and so much more. We send thousands of parcels a month, and nearly all of them are delivered next day. So if you're here listening to me, jump over to ceres.shop and have a look how we can support your business. And remember, if you order before 2 p.m, 98% of those deliveries are made next day. Whilst you're on our website, go over a couple of tabs and read our blog. We've published over 200 articles and we'll probably release about 10 to 12 a week depending on the news cycle. It's the best place to keep informed of what's happening with the wider hospitality world, agriculture, business and economy. If there's someone you think we should be talking to on the podcast, let us know. If they're doing something really interesting, we want to hear from them. So email me at any time at Stelios@worldofceres.com. If you want to keep in the loop of what we are doing at Ceres, then the first place to be is following us on social media. But to get exclusive offers and the latest news delivered to your inbox, join our mailing list. The link will be in the episode show notes. Hi Zoe, welcome to the Ceres podcast.
Hi Estelle, you okay?
Yeah, nice to have you on again, mate.
Yeah, it's been a while, isn't it? I think it's been about 2 years since I was last on.
No longer, I think.
Nice to be back.
Well, it was episode 11. So what's that? That's a few years ago, mate.
My days, episode 11. I feel old now.
You were young once. So
yeah, I've been catching up with all the podcasts.
Well, yeah, it's lots happening, and as you know, this new format is to discuss the news, and you've chosen 4 articles, and let's start with them. So you wanted to start with the KFC article, and we did touch on this with Mark Petru, but I'm happy to discuss it again. You know me, so to give people that maybe haven't heard that episode yet, we'll give them a bit of background. This is the article about the KFC controversy, navigating health policies and business interests. And basically, to sum the article up, KFC has been arguing, let's say, or giving the local councils a bit of pushback about the opening near schools policy. So essentially, I think the policy is you can't open a food business within 400 meters of a school. And KFC, since 2017, has challenged over 43 councils. Depending which side of the argument you're on, you could see it as it's great for business and freedom of rights, etc. And then if you're on the other side, it's challenging anti-obesity and so on. Well, obesity, I guess, in this instance. So why did you choose this article?
Okay, so the reason I chose this article is because I've got personal experience with KFC opening up next to my high school, the one that I attended, which is only like a 5 minute walk away from my shop. Um, so lunchtime trade for us was very busy at one point, where we had a lot of school kids from the high school come and always have their curry butties or curry chip butties in our shop. And then the schools, then what they decided to do was um, keep the keep the children inside the schools. So they stopped them going outside of the schools, spending their money. And the reason why this happened was in the Welsh government was to keep the money coming into the schools to develop the councils and schools because they were going through a growth phase as well where they needed money for redevelopment into their schools. So they stopped the schools. They stopped the kids coming out of schools. And then in the meantime, there's a new retail park that opened up opposite the high school. And in this retail park, there's McDonald's and a KFC. And those kids can now go to those fast food takeaways and purchase their food for lunch. So this really struck a chord with me because I thought I've been through this, and KFC, the ones that they've challenged, one of them must have been Cardiff because it's opened up. It's just across the road from that new high school.
Cool. So obviously this was from 2017, and you went to school in like what 1945 or something. No, joking aside. So how do you lean? Are they right to challenge the governments or the councils? Are they wrong to challenge the councils? What do you think of that policy first? If we break this down into segments, what's your thoughts about the policy of opening 400 meters near a school?
See, it is a really tough one. I'll tell you why. Is because if the schools allow their kids to um, leave for lunch, then obviously it's up to them where they decide to spend their money. But then school are then governing whether they should or not allow the children to leave. But then you've also got the other side of the argument where at school time, at home time, they can go and visit those outlets anyway.
Mm. So in my I've given this a little bit of thought, and I have discussed it already on a previous episode. But in my mind, I don't like government getting too involved, or I'll bring that down all the way to local council getting too involved with what business does. I think that if business is safe and it's operating to standards, good food standards, etc., then that's it. Just let it carry on. Let it do what it's got to do. And then where this becomes an issue for me is that schools should be doing their job and keeping students in, let's say, if that's their job, yeah. And then parents should be doing the job after school and making sure that, the kids are looked after. I don't think it's a business's fault. I don't think that they should be held liable. And saying 400 meters away from a school, I'm not being funny, but that's just, it's not workable at all. I think you've got a different take on it because you were a business and you're thinking of it from a business mind, and that business then opened and then the school then reacted, which then had unintended consequences on your business. Is that what you're sort of getting at by your intro?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to what you said about it going into like business policy and them not governing their own businesses, but what they do govern is health policy.
I
So
get,
further
yeah.
down the line, health policy will come into it
So yeah,
because they will have to
so there is a
pay
fine
for that.
balance between obviously business training standards and public health policy, and obviously we have a national
Mm.
health. So you've got to be able to balance those two. Obviously, it's difficult. What do you do? But the point is, I would imagine KFC is generally recognised as safe. It is safe food. Now, is it healthy food? No. Yeah, I don't think.
No, I would
No.
say the government is saying it's definitely not healthy
Yeah,
food, which is why this
yeah,
has
and
come
I'd
out.
imagine that fish and chips would fall into the same camp as KFC, regardless of how we see it from our bias. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
it would. Yeah, yeah.
So, and then not only fish and chips, but nearly all hot food takeaways, nearly all restaurants. Let's face it, even posh restaurants, they're not going to be health food. On no level are they health food. And if people think they are, they're delusional because the portion sizes, 3-course meals, and so on means that you're definitely getting more of a calorie intake. than you would eating at
I
home.
do. I do think we. I mean, we can push it as much as we can about being a healthy takeaway fish and chips. But I think on the whole, you're right. It is classified in the same
Yeah,
category.
I think I'm right, and I think the fact is that the government ministers or whoever the bureaucrats or whoever makes this decision would 100% see it that way. Whether I think I'm right or you think I'm right, they are just going to look at it and say, no, that's in that pile there. So the point
Yeah.
is that fish and chips and most hot food takeaway is classed as unhealthy. And it's definitely unnecessary. Like, we are building a business because we are trying to get people through the door, as in takeaways. I don't think it's as necessary as food on a supermarket shelf, and that probably is the reason why VAT exists on hot food takeaways too, is because it's something that isn't really needed because you could actually go home and make food yourself. So I think,
Yeah.
For me, this is why it is always a balance between public health and trading as a business. The government does sort of need to be careful, but I don't think this is big government anyway. This isn't big national government. This is the stories about local councillors, and it's sort of local councillors that are, let's say, feeling the power somewhat, and challenging certain things. And I do think that KFC have done right to challenge this. I think I wrote in the story that it's been tried that two different studies have tried to duplicate this effect of opening KFCs near schools, or not just KFCs but any hot food, and they just can't see that there's an effect on children being fatter or thinner. Like you just said, you're one of the slimmest people I know, and you live in a food business and you live amongst lots of food businesses, so I don't think that is the only cause. I'm not saying it isn't a cause, but I don't think it's the only cause.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the power hungry politicians making these decisions, and I think what they're trying to do is instead of putting the decisions, like you said, you can always go home and get your own food. But what they're trying to do is influence the decisions that children make. So teenagers, people in high school, the decisions that they make, I think they're trying to influence them and
Yeah,
take the
well,
decision out of their hands.
it don't work. The truth is, it don't work. You see,
No, of course it doesn't.
yeah,
I agree with you.
kids are addicted to Monster sweets, not just Monster, any of those drinks, vapes. So they used to be addicted to smoking. So I'm not being funny. You're not going to stop a kid from
Yeah.
eating, let's just say, KFC in this instance. And actually, it's probably better than a lot of those things that I just mentioned. So, so, and if it is a
Yeah,
hot,
I think yeah, when they did challenge these governments, I'm sure they said, look, we're all 5-star rated. Our health and food guidelines, our sustainability policies are in place. So what would you rather, us come in or someone else come in? So I think
and
they
this is
probably
true.
did have some things going for them.
Yeah, and this is true. And look, for me, it's very clear cut. The schools, if they don't want to let people out, don't let people out. You make sure kids are fed at school. Yeah. If they're fed and watered at school, they've got no reason to leave the school. And actually, they just cause more trouble out on the streets anyway. So, just in my mind, let kids eat at school and then let them do what they want after school. You can't challenge everything that people do. And I think, where does it end, is my opinion. Like, you know, I just think, do we start forcing people to go to the gym? Well, no, I'm not against the idea, but yeah, it's ways. I think this is the easy wins, isn't it? It's the easy hard.
Yeah.
For me, it's like, if they're going to nanny us, why don't they nanny us for good things? Why don't they
Yeah,
subsidise
it's because
some?
I think they're probably focusing on things that they can control
No, they
rather than
can't clearly, because
other
they
sectors.
can't clearly because people challenge it back. KFC have challenged it back. Chances are, loads of others have challenged it back. So I think that sometimes,
But you mentioned vapes. I mean, vapes aren't regulated either.
yet.
And
And that's what I'm saying.
yes, yeah, and
Regulate them. Like, if you're going to do something, regulate them.
yeah,
For
yeah,
me, it's, Mark Petru made a point and said, like, he believes that all food is food. If it goes through your mouth, then it's food. I slightly disagree. I think that sweets and snacks aren't food. They're sweets and snacks, and yes, they're a form of energy that go through your mouth, but I don't think they're food. So, for me, and I think this is where we've got it sort of wrong, is that where everyone's asking for like a level playing field on VAT and lower VAT and all this and that, I think that should be taken out of the equation. I think snacks aren't actually nutritional. They're not nutritional foods that are needed to sustain yourself. I think that I can live without, believe it or not, I can live without Kit Kats and all of that, crisps, whereas I can't really live without food. Then that's the truth. Yeah. So in my opinion, all of that crap should be highly taxed. And actually that brings a good argument to why food, and I mean real food, should be lower tax. That's just my unpopular opinion, I would imagine, because everybody would say, well, no, that.
No, I agree with that to some extent. I think sweets and snacks, I mean, in a school setting, it should be higher tax, and they should realise that
I don't even
if
think
something is going to pay for the NHS, then that should be it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'd probably go as far as saying that, and I know it sounds silly, but I'd probably go as far as saying that, say you're in a restaurant and the starter and the main course was, let's say, 10% VAT. I actually think the dessert should be 20% VAT. I think because it's a sweet.
No, that's silly.
Sorry, I'm saying it to somebody here who is addicted to sweet things. So your tax contribution would severely go through the roof. I have never met.
I wouldn't say I'm addicted. I do like my sweet desserts. I like my pastries and sweets and snacks, but everything in moderation, I say.
Yes, and you moderately eat probably 3 times more than me when it comes to sweet treats. Yes. So, no, I would imagine that would be an unfavourable tax on yourself. But I do think that there's certain things in the diet that are known to be bad for us. That is it. And I think that is starting to come through now. So, but I don't think having a KFC... Actually, you could argue that KFC would be better than a normal chicken shop because, like you said, they have got sustainability, they have got traceability, they have got hopefully 5 stars or 5, whatever it is for the local council. If they've got all of those things, you could probably argue they are better than someone who has none of those things. So,
yeah, and I'm sure that's probably why they challenged the councils on these remarks that if you're going to have someone there, why not it be a national brand that's stood against the test of time, and they're promoting all these qualities for sustainability, traceability, and the provenance of their food.
So do you think that it is too much of a nanny state? Do you think the government should, or well, in this instance, local councillors, but obviously the policy was set by government, I guess. Do you think that the government should be saying, look, this shouldn't be allowed? Because obviously, one thing we have to balance.
No, I think everything in moderation, but it's up to you to choose that moderation, isn't it? I mean, if someone really likes, say, fatty foods, or let's just say chips, for instance. If someone really likes chips, then they can have chips. Everything in moderation. But for them to then say how much you should have is up to them. I think guidance is brilliant because then they can guide you and say you need X amount of calories per day. This is how much carbs, how much protein you should be having, and then it's up to you to take that guidance and do what you want with it.
I just think that from a business point of view, KFC wouldn't open anywhere, not just KFC, any food business wouldn't open anywhere if they didn't think the right demographic was nearby, or at least so they could make a certain amount of a level of turnover above their break even. So they clearly see patterns. They clearly see that people want this product. And actually, does it matter where it is now? If a lot of these places, just like fish and chip shops, are doing Deliveroo, which we're going to talk about shortly, Deliveroo, Uber, and all of that lot, does it actually matter if it's near a school? Because if they're using bikes,
but still, isn't that good business practice? I mean, if I was to open up a fish and chip shop, wouldn't I locate it in around chimney pots where I think it would make the most amount of money? Isn't that just good business sense?
And that's what I'm saying. They wouldn't do it if they didn't see a pattern trending there.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just think no one's opening a business just to get school kids, especially a business that probably has a high threshold, a high turnover threshold, like KFC. I just don't see it. They would need to turn over a serious amount of money, and just being next to a school is not going to help them. That's my point.
Well, that's not. Yeah, I agree. That's probably not their sole purpose of being there. But in my instance, in my example, it's in the actual retail park, which is very near a school.
Yeah,
I agree. It's a number of factors.
Councils couldn't say anything about someone being in a retail park anyway. I think it'd be impossible for them to stop that. So I do think they're probably just picking on certain businesses in certain localities. There's no way you could tell anybody what to do in a retail park, if I'm honest. Yeah, interesting. It's an interesting topic, and we're probably going to see a lot more of it. But there is no doubt that we can't be delusional about the public health issue. We have an NHS that is struggling, as they say, and people are heavier than they used to be, probably unhealthier than they used to be. So, and we work less than we used to, like, as people. Like, if you think all of our ancestors would have physically worked harder than we did, we sit a lot more, So, and I mean everybody, So yeah, you could see how, from a public health point of view, they need to balance this. But I'm not sure if this is the right answer, if I'm honest.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that, because I have a conversation with my mum a while ago, and my grandfather was he was a farmer. He had a lot of farmland, but he used to eat like crazy, and he used to have like these large milk portions called lassi, very heavy fat milky drinks.
Yeah,
and my mum used to say, like, it was fine. It didn't matter what they ate, because they used to burn off the calories by doing very hard manual labor.
Yeah,
I think the demographic that we have today in this country is that our relationship with food is changing, and the way that we work is changing, and there's a lot of moving factors that we need to embrace.
I think also it's worth noting that food has changed. Milk with natural sugars, I mean no added sugars, is never going to be bad for anybody. But if you're adding things to it, it's not going to be great. I think this is half the problem. I've got a godfather. My godfather in Cyprus. I haven't got multiple, just the one. He's probably 70 to 80 years old, skinny. I mean, skinniest person you'll ever meet. There's nothing on him. Like, he's a farmer too. Smoked up to a few years ago, probably 60 a day, maybe 80, and just you see him. He eats whatever he wants. He's a machine, and because he's never stopped, he gets up at 5, maybe 4, goes to the farm, whereas he probably does more in a day physically than I do in a week. So, and I'm not even lazy, but I'm not a physical person like that, So, whereas nowadays, no one's really doing that. You only have to go to a tube station in London to see. Yeah, everyone would rather wait for the lift than walk up the steps.
Oh yeah,
it's like
we are. I think as a nation we're getting lazier, but I think we're just getting used to like ease of comfort as well. I mean, we're going to move on to the aggregators as well. I mean, isn't that a part of it as well, about just sitting at home and waiting for food to be delivered to you? Isn't that just a part of our normal society that we're a part of, and the way that times are now?
So I don't want to jump there too fast, but that tells you how useless this policy is, because the fact is, most school kids would rather get home, if this is the case, get on their Xbox and order a Deliveroo. So it makes no odds. Yeah. So this is fruitless. So moving on to the next topic, young man. So you chose this one as well, and it's UK's new food recycling laws. What businesses need to know. Again, all of these articles are going to be in our show notes. If people don't know what the show notes are, that's just the app where it tells you what's what on the podcast player app. So go there and you can see all the links. And this article discusses the new recycling laws for the UK, and it applies to England, Wales, and Scotland. Key points are simpler recycling. Basically, the long and short of it is businesses are going to have to start separating waste. So I'm guessing tin goes in one pile, paper goes in another pile, food waste goes into another pile. Everything's getting separated. Homeowners in the UK have been doing this for probably 4 or 5 years, I'd imagine. So why did you choose this article, Zoe?
Okay, so I chose this article because I've just had a shop refurbishment, and when we opened back up again, the policy at Cardiff Council had changed. So we used to recycle in orange bags, just general waste, but by the time we had opened up again, the policy had changed in Cardiff. So we had to then segregate all of our waste. So now we've got 3 bins, and our cardboard goes separate. So again, very similar to the KFC article, I've been through this policy change, and I think it's a move for a better future. But I do think they are being very ambitious with their timelines and when they think they can achieve this by.
Do you not think that it's a pretty basic policy? Like, just telling
You say
people.
basic. I mean, you say basic. It's been in Scotland for 12 years, so it's extremely basic in some sense, but in other sense, in businesses, to separate your food waste, I don't think it's quite basic. I think that's probably a big leap.
Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking, at the warehouse, we separate all our waste. Every other factories that I've been to separate their waste. And they do that because I think it just makes sense. So I think maybe hospitality takeaways and so on are probably the last ones doing this. I think even McDonald's on the front end, I don't know about the back end, but the front end, they're separating waste. They've got a closed loop system where they're collecting straws, they're collecting cups. They tend to take the lids off and put that in a separate one. Whether everybody does it, I don't know. But I know that they take the rubbish out the back and they split it out. So,
but isn't, I mean, you say it's the hospitality are the last ones to take this on board. Isn't that because it's harder for them? Because now I've got to store 3 extra bins on site.
But isn't that harder for an office as well? Like, I don't know. Like, I follow you, but
no. But I mean, in an office setting, you're not going to get much food waste. I mean, the policy in Wales is that it's only if you have over 5 kilograms of food a week.
Yeah.
So in an office, you're not going to really have that, are you?
No, because you'd hope people eat their food and take it with them in their body. But like,
exactly. So an office would be much easier.
Yeah, I guess. But I don't know. A part of me thinks it isn't that hard. It's just going to take some planning. They're going to need some new bins, and hopefully they don't have to bin the old bins because that would be pretty wasteful. But like if they say you've got to use blue, red, and green bin inside, and now all of a sudden you have to get rid of the grey bin, like that's a bit harsh. Like, but it's probably just going to be the colour of the bin bags, I'd imagine. But I don't know. Like there is a logic to separating it so that the tin can go and get redone rather than ending up in landfill. Although, and I've said this before, not a lot ends up in landfill anyway these days. So I don't know how.
But this is their whole thing, that they don't want it to go into landfill, and their target of 50-50.
I don't think anything goes to landfill nowadays. I don't know the exact figure, but if there is, it's very small. I think most of the stuff now goes to incinerator. So yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to know the figure on that. And probably that's the next article we need to write. But I think that a lot of waste bags now just go to incinerator. So now what I don't know is, are those bags being opened? Are they then going down a belt? Are they then taking off the tin? Are they, maybe cardboard can go? But you'd think tin, for argument, I'm just using tin as an example, you'd think that would probably have some value, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think this. I don't think they open up the bags. Once it goes, it goes. Unless there's probably an investigation going on whether it's your waste or not. But I don't think they open up the bags. I don't think they have those resources in place. I know, but this is all a knock-on effect. Go on.
Go on. Knock-on effect from?
This is just a knock-on effect of the net zero, the 2050 target that they have to reach. And all of this planning has been done prior in place. And they're just bringing it out now slowly. But I still think businesses have a long way to go to get there. Because they haven't, I think in Wales it's being implemented next year.
Yeah.
We've already adopted it. In Scotland it's been there for 12 years. But in England they haven't released an implementation date. They've got an approximate year of 2025 or 2026 of which they have to abide by. But it's not really set in stone, and they keep delaying it because they know how hard it's going to be.
I don't know. I don't know if it's hard. Like
it is hard still. Trust me, I have a business. I have to separate the waste and store it on site. And you've been to some of the fish and chip shops, and they are really tough. They are tight spaces sometimes. You're talking about an extra 3 bins on site.
Yeah, I just feel like, I don't know. I feel like, and I may be wrong, that it's not a big deal. I think there's probably bigger deals. But maybe that's also the issue, that it's not a big deal, and these little things have a way of dragging out. One thing is it's how it's implemented. Like, for example, at home 2 years ago, they made us put all recycling in different bins. So paper at the bottom, card and paper at the bottom, plastic on the top. I can't remember, tins in another thing. But then I noticed that they were just tipping them all in one. And I was like, why should I spend the time here separating this crap? Like, so then I stopped separating it. And then about 2 weeks later, they just said, don't separate it no more. We'll do it. As long as it's clean, obviously, we'll do it. So tins, glass, everything is going in the same bin now. And they sort it at wherever, I don't know where. So, but obviously I influence that decision. But I just think, I don't know. I just think it's common sense and the right thing to do, but all in good time, I guess. And like you say, it is going to be more bins. So, and that's going to need investment. So that's going to need time. So yeah, I'm not poo-pooing it. I'm just sort of saying that there's going to be a bit of cost involved. And you never know. Maybe these bin companies like Biffa will have a solution. You don't know. Like maybe they'll provide the bins for their rental cost. And I don't know. But look, what it highlights more than anything is that there is always more red tape coming. Running a business isn't just about opening the door and doing what your primary goal is. Let's say it's frying fish and chips or selling batter mix. There's that much red tape now that I think it sort of makes the barrier to entry higher again. And that could either be seen as a good thing or a bad thing. One thing I do know is I've spent time in other countries and they do none of this. Like, you know, if you're in Cyprus, people still smoke in restaurants. They still throw rubbish normally. No one's segregating any rubbish. So once again, we are either, you could either see it as we're pushing things forward and being responsible, or we're just adding headache to our lives.
But those countries, Star, have they signed up to the net zero 2050? Probably not.
Well, if you're Cyprus, let's say, then you're in the European Union, and I guess they probably have.
They'll have to then.
Yeah.
Well, they'll have to be net zero by 2050. That's what they've signed up for. And
yeah.
I think this is another part of Britain being a global leader, is that they normally take the lead on this, don't they? So they will get started before everyone else.
And like I said, you've got to decide which side of that you're on. Is it we're doing a great thing by being a global leader, or are we just making our lives hard for ourselves where nobody else will? And I think that's only listeners that are listening to this will know which side they sit on. I like the fact that we do push forward. I like the fact that we've got the best food standards in the world. You know, some of the best food standards in the world. I love the fact that we are leaders. You know, but sometimes that does come at a cost, and nearly all the time it comes at a cost. And that could also be seen as good, because if it stops anybody opening in a business and just opening the door and selling without the right procedures, then, you know, that's also good as well, I think. You know, look, all of these things are swings and roundabouts, and I think it's interesting. But recycling is fairly basic. What they've got to be careful of is, and because we wrote an article about this, and it's wish cycling. Have you heard about this?
No, what's wish cycling?
So that's where people intend to do the right thing, but do it wrong, and then everything that's in that pile gets binned. So, for example, say I've got a big pile of recycling, and then I had a plastic tub that had chicken in it, raw chicken. And then I don't rinse it, let's say, or wash it, and then I put it in that pile. Well, when that pile gets to the processing plant and they see that it's got raw chicken in it, they have to bin the whole lot. And then, something that was intended to be good then had a negative consequence. And then they have to then get rid of the whole batch and has to be set fire to or whatever.
But that's always going to be there, isn't there? I mean, I mean, you will never be perfect all the time with every single bag, will we?
Well, no, and I think this is where things need to be loosened a little bit. Like, for example, anything that's had takeaway food in it cannot be recycled. So this is one of the things. So when you see people talking about like using bio boxes or corrugated boxes, and they're like, "Oh yeah, they're recyclable," they are not recyclable. They're just not. At the most, out of a pizza box, you can use the bit that hasn't had food on, so the top bit, because it has no oil on it. Anything that's had food on it or oils on it cannot be recycled. And they also can't go into composting. So they have to go through the normal waste, which ends up in incinerating. So I think there is a lot of things that we as producers and business people don't understand either. So I've always wondered.
I think we're on the right track. We're going towards the same destination, but don't think at any point we're at the final stop.
No, and
I think there's still a lot of work. It's a continual process.
Yeah, I was
though,
going to
isn't it,
say there's no
recycling?
such thing as a stop, is there? Because we'll find out in 10 years that we could do better at something else, and
Yeah.
and I think that's good too, isn't it? You need to constantly push, but I think business people would love to see some form of cost saving measures, not just things that add to red tape and admin and more spending. I think that would be nice. I think.
Yeah.
But I think that is.
So I'll tell you, when we reopened and we had 4 separate bins, so now our food goes separate, our cardboard separate, metals and plastics in general, I thought it would probably cost less, but it's ended up costing a lot more. And I remember thinking, well, why is this happening? If I'm doing a lot of the work, segregating it and making it easier for the council, why is it costing more? And it's just the process that we're in. It's just the system that you're in. And then you then start to think about, there's more trucks on the road now as well. So they're burning more energy and fuel, getting to more places more than once a week. So I don't know. It's just you have to let the council haven't you?
I'd like, well, there is that. But I'd like to think that the waste they now pick up has more value. Because you'd think they've now got segregated tin and glass. They can be recycled. I don't know if they have a ton value. They must have. And then you've got cardboard. If that can be reprocessed, again, everything has a value. So obviously, rubbish is rubbish.
Yeah, but we don't see that as business.
No,
owners.
we don't see that. But what I'm saying is, if I use Biffa as an example, because there's lots of other rubbish companies, let's say. Rubbish is probably not the right word. Bless them. But if they're receiving recycled, pre-sorted, clean product, then you'd think there's some value there. So they could look at that pile and say, we've just received a whole pile from City Road in Cardiff. It's clean, dry cardboard with no oil on it. We can send that to a cardboard processor and they can rework it. Oh, that's got to be worth £50 a ton, for argument's sake. I don't know. Yeah. I know none of the figures. You could argue if they say, oh, we got that 20-foot skip over there full of glass jars. It's clean. There's no labels on it. We can just send that to be reprocessed. Oh, that's £400. So, yeah, you'd hope that those costs are realised and then the savings are passed on to you guys. But I'd imagine that's
exactly what I'm saying, though. Yeah. At the moment, I don't think they are.
Yeah, well, maybe the market needs to shift a little bit. Or maybe it won't. Maybe the business model is made on charging both sides. And that's their business too, I guess. So
yeah, maybe.
Yeah. But one thing I do know that most packaging in the fish and chip industry and most of elsewhere cannot be compostable because A, it's had food on it, and B, it has to go to a proper organic, bio-organic, whatever compound where it's got proper anaerobic conditions. You can't just, our good friend Mike Pilley, he did a test a few years ago where he got some bio boxes, so made out of bagasse, buried them in the ground. They're probably still there.
Yeah.
So, they're not going to decompose. Polystyrene will probably decompose faster, actually, but polystyrene breaks down with UV light, whereas bagasse doesn't. But the interesting thing with bagasse is that it burns very efficiently. So in Thailand and a lot of countries like that, they use bagasse in indoor fires and outdoor fires, and that's what their original use was for. So you could argue if bagasse trays have oil on them and then they go into incinerator, that could have a net benefit. I'm not saying a huge benefit, but a little benefit,
So, probably a small benefit. It's
it's flammable.
Polystyrene, the way the policy came out with polystyrene, I think was perfect because it took the decision away from small operators and into
I'm not defending
the larger cash and carry.
Just to make it clear, I'm not defending polystyrene. I think other packaging is a lot better for the product than forget what it does to the environment and so on. What it does to the product that's inside that packaging. Polystyrene makes it sweat. It always the food goes a bit wet and limp. Whereas all the new packaging absorbs the moisture, so it stays crispier, hotter. So there's so many more benefits. I was just talking from a recycling point of view, and so on. But talking about compostable and stuff like that, it's probably not a term that should be used, if I'm right. If I'm
Well,
honest.
some of the packaging does say biodegradable on there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I look, everything, from what I understand, everything is biodegradable. No, well, no, not everything's biodegradable. Everything's compostable. Given enough time and the right conditions, everything is compostable. Or is that
Oh, wait, I mean,
biodegradable?
I
I'm not
buried
sure.
one of the biogas trays as well, and it was half composted, but it did have a lot of oil on it, and I think the oil and the moisture in there does help it biodegrade.
Yeah.
Over what period of time, I don't know.
Yeah, and obviously you've got to be careful with composting. When I was a bit younger, we just moved house. Oh no, we just moved into our first house, and I wanted to have a compost heap. I don't know why, because I didn't even grow anything. And I think it was just a way of hoarding rubbish. But if you have anything with fats and meats, you've got to be careful because of rodents. So that's one of the main reasons why they say no fats and meats on packaging, because rodents, it attracts rodents. So
Okay.
yeah. See, you've learnt something new today, Zoe.
Did you attract any rodents?
Probably. I left house. I moved house by that point. I left it for someone else to deal with. I was like, "Oh, you've got a compost heap over there. Oh, great. Yeah, see ya."
They open it up, it's full of rats.
Yeah, probably. So, moving on, you chose an article, and the article is about Deliveroo, and the title is Deliveroo bolsters its arsenal with non-food deliveries, and the summary of the article is essentially Deliveroo's done deals with hardware stores and so on, mostly Screwfix, and they've also done deals with Boots and Morrison's, Sainsbury's, Waitrose. Now, I'm not overly offended by the Waitrose and the Sainsbury's bit, but the Screwfix bit adds another element to this. But why did you choose this article, Zoe?
So aggregators have been quite interesting for me. I've loved hearing about all their stories. I'm a big follower of Uber and their pricing model. Similar with Deliveroo, I've followed their story quite closely. They've been a fierce competitor in the aggregator market as well as Just Eat. I love hearing about their stories, about how much business they're doing. I find it really interesting because I never thought it would take off how it is. But saying that, I still think they're still going through a growth phase, and one really interesting topic of delivery is always the amount of profit they make. After 10 years in business, they still haven't turned a profit, and they're still trying to reap the rewards of the capital expenditure they put in initially. So aggregators just in general is so interesting for me, their business model, how they work, and the fact that they've now gone on and they're partnering with Screwfix and supermarkets is just really interesting how they're trying to stay in this market, because I think it's saturated as it is. One of the big boys is going to have to drop out, and they're all waiting to pounce on the growing market.
So break that down. I'll break that down. So I think number one, are they like Amazon? Amazon went 15 to 20 years without making a profit. And when I say that, it was all on paper because all the profit was going back in to rebuild into the business. Could that just be this? Are they using profit to buy customer share? And they are struggling. All of them are struggling. My second point is, my theory is that the first one to drop out is the one that McDonald's buys out and has their own delivery hub. Yeah, that's my theory.
Yeah.
I said it here first, guys.
I agree.
Yeah, and I do think that what's interesting about Deliveroo, which is slightly different to everyone else, is that Deliveroo has always sort of said, we are here to deliver things. They started with food, but it was never like Just Eat or Uber Eats, which had eat in the name. Like Deliveroo always said, we are going to deliver whatever it is. And that's what I think. I saw an article with him, and he said that Will Shu, the owner, said, CEO said, we're not Deliver Eats. And I thought that was really interesting that they see themselves as delivering anything.
Yeah, but I just think that's. But I never heard them say that right at the beginning. They're saying that now.
Yeah, they're saying that now because they're trying.
Their business policy.
I think they're trying to change history somewhat. But I do find it interesting. But I think that there's going to be numerous problems. I think number one, I don't think none of these guys are making the money they need to make because they're all trying to grow market share. So that tells me that they're keeping their percentage fees down But their percentage fees are already, according to their users, or sorry, their suppliers, which is fish and chip shops, restaurants, takeaways, and whoever else puts product through them. Their argument is, well, the fees are already unsustainable. So what gives?
I agree.
Yeah. So what gives if it's unsustainable on both sides? Then and it needs to be higher for one side and lower for the other side. Well, what happens?
Well, I'll tell you what I think's happening. I think they're losing market share. I think
As in
that a lot
Deliveroo
of
on their own, you mean?
Yeah, just Deliveroo. If we just talk
Yeah.
about Deliveroo,
Yeah.
I think they're losing market share because they've seen a lot of new aggregators come in. Food Hub, Grubhub. Over the years, there's been numerous, and now you've always got on-the-go deliveries as well, like Zap, and you have Get Here, where they deliver like very small items from one place to another. I think they're losing market share, and their marketing is always being aggressive. They put millions into their marketing. So it is unsustainable from their business model and from the restaurant point of view. And what they're trying to do now, I think, is that explore new territories where they feel as though they can get a higher spend. So with Screwfix, for example, if you're going to go buy a power tool, the spend is higher. So they're going after these high value shops and high value retailers that they think they can get a better return. And I don't think it's going to last because just like Screwfix also have a separate partnership that they can deliver anything to you within 60 minutes, and that is not with Deliveroo. That's with someone else. So they haven't gone exclusively with Deliveroo.
No. So if we look at that for a second, that specific point, I think that's because Screwfix are probably finding it hard to fulfill those orders. So they're thinking, well, if we bring a partner on board, they can do some of their legwork. Now, what that also does is push more volume through that system. And I think that's where it starts to crack a little bit, where everything starts to get a bit, maxing out, so to say. They're going to hit capacity. I personally wouldn't want food delivered with, I don't know, tools, but if they end up being, but if a Turkish kebab restaurant was next door to a Screwfix and the rider was there even, and he picked up both, would I turn him away? Probably not. But I do think that I don't know if Deliveroo is struggling as much as the others, or more or less. They've got investment from Amazon. Amazon won't be going into this blind. They would know a thing or two. And I don't know. I just think that it's interesting. I think a lot of these companies seem to be going through a tough time. And they probably are to some degree. But I think they've got bigger headwinds. I really do. There was an article recently that we wrote, and it said how a lot of riders are doing swaps. So let's say if rider A doesn't want to do it, he just basically gives his phone to rider B. They get £100 a week for that ride. And we don't know anything about rider B. We don't know if he's meant to be in this country, if he's not meant to be in this country. He's getting the money, and rider A gives him it minus £100. And then, so now they're having to put that through. They're having to do a lot more checks on them. They're having to get passport information, make sure they're legitimate, make sure they're allowed to be in the country. These aggregators are also meant to be passing on very soon financial information about how many hours they've done, how much they've earned, etc., to HMRC. And then if you bundle that with lower immigration, I think you're going to see that prices for aggregators are going to go up. They are definitely going to go up. They cannot sustain it. There isn't going to be enough people to do it. If you saw the new policy...
I don't think they're sustaining it at the moment still.
Well, exactly.
I think they're going through a really tough phase at the moment. So if they can't do it now...
how are they going to do it tomorrow?
Look at coronavirus.
Go on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go on. Coronavirus.
So if you look at coronavirus, that was probably the best year for aggregators. It was... Everyone had to stay inside. It was they could do contactless delivery. Everyone wanted stuff where everything was non-access, and they still haven't turned a profit.
Yeah, but I think
that was probably their.
No, but I think you misunderstand the word profit. It would not surprise me if it's just like Amazon. Amazon, everyone said for years, haven't turned a profit, until they turned a profit, and then all of a sudden they're Wall Street darlings. For me, it's if it's all a balance sheet question, are they moving money around? Are they basically saying, yes, we didn't make a oh, you think they haven't made a profit because in traditional terms they haven't made a profit? I feel like
I think they're struggling. I mean, you're comparing it with Amazon. I think you're comparing apples and oranges. Amazon developed their own ecosystem.
Yeah, and well, if you spoke to anyone at Deliveroo, they'd tell you they have too. But I'm not, But what I'm saying is, I get what you're saying. I think I'm probably a bit more cynical in the fact that a lot of these large companies, they use a lot of money that's given to them from venture capital, angel investors, so on, so on, so on. And they have long runways. They can go quite a long time without turning a profit as such. And sometimes their job is to spend it as fast as possible to grow market share. We're not used to that because we're running very different businesses, whereas these guys are very much like that, and it's all about scale. It is already a very tight market. There's 3 major players. Yeah, there's a few local ones, but the 3 major players seem to be really battling it out. But at the end of the day, it's not about what... I think the thing that I've noticed with all of them, though, is that all of them really don't care about the small local traders. They all care about McDonald's, KFC, Burger King, Boots, Screwfix, which tells me they all want volume.
Yeah, I mean, volume does drive profit, but I just don't think it's just not the Amazon model. It's a different model, but they had an IPO listing last year of £8 billion, Deliveroo. Last year they lost 60%. It was called disastrous. It was absolutely disastrous. And I think they've got about 1.6 billion in the bank. 1 billion of that is cash. So their actual business model is worth 600 million. Which, if you compare it to the other aggregators, is nothing. You're talking about Uber. You're talking about 39 billion. You're talking about other aggregators.
Uber has got the benefit of being, one of the biggest taxi companies on the planet now, and you've got Just Eat, which is probably the biggest food aggregator in the world as well, because of they're owned by a large European company now. So
it got bought out.
Yeah. So I guess Deliveroo is probably what looks like the ugly duckling, the weakling of the pack.
It's extremely weak. It's valued at 1.8 billion.
So do you think they're the ones that are getting swallowed up by McDonald's then?
Yeah, I think they're struggling, and their headways into these new territories isn't going to last, and that's what they're trying to survive. Okay. It's worth 1.8. Just Eat is worth 24 billion. Uber, it's a data collection company just as well as a delivery company, but that's worth 39 billion.
Well,
and it had a disastrous IPO. It was absolutely disastrous.
It was overhyped though. Like, it was massively overhyped.
It wasn't still. Let's look at the facts. It was straight after coronavirus. Aggregators had a really good year, and now they've exited markets. They're out of Netherlands. They're out of Australia. They're losing market share. I think just because we're talking about Deliveroo, I think if we were talking about other aggregators, my concern would probably be different. But Deliveroo as a whole, I think, is struggling.
Yeah,
big time.
In time, we will see. I think you might be right, but you may be wrong. But if you're right or wrong, and more news comes out, we'll write about it, and I think we'll get you on to talk about that. I think it's an interesting development because whatever happens to the aggregators will have a knock-on effect. Personally, I'm a fan of doing it yourself. I think the business doing it themselves. I think that, if you're a pizza business, a takeaway, if you can do it yourself, really go at it and do it. And I think try and make it happen. But I also understand when people say, well, I can have them do it for, 19% or 26% or whatever it is. I haven't got a staff member standing here doing nothing for 4 hours. So I sort of see both sides of the argument. You have to try and make it work for, your business.
Yeah. It's a good option to have available, but I'm a firm believer of investing in your own delivery infrastructure, and just, it can be more cost intensive at the beginning, but more profitable in the long run. So I think any business that I go into, and I talk to a lot of fish and chip shop owners, I always say, what is your long-term plan? What do you hope to achieve by going on these aggregators? And a lot of them do say it's a quick fix.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the problem is, once you're on, it's hard to come off, you know?
That's why I've never gone on.
Yeah.
So my shop, it's been inundated with a lot of the salespeople, Deliveroo, Food Hub, and they all come in and they all want a piece of the pie. But we've persisted and we've developed our own infrastructure, which takes a little bit longer, costs a little bit more, but in the long run, it's going to benefit me. And I think that's the way to go. I think if you go in there for the short term, what I'm doing is, if I was to go with Deliveroo now, all of my customers, I would have to say, look, we're on Deliveroo, go onto their platform and deliver and get our food delivered to you.
Yeah.
But then when I develop my own system, what Deliveroo's going to do is they're going to divert all of my customers
to theirs,
to another fish and chip shop. They're not going to care about me if I'm not one of their customers.
It's not.
So they just divert my customer base somewhere else.
It's not.
What would I do with that?
It's not overly pertinent to this discussion, but I like to remind people that with the aggregators, you are not their customer. You are their supplier. The minute you understand that, everything makes more sense. The customer of Just Eat is the customer that should be yours. You, in this arrangement, are the supplier. And Just Eat and Deliveroo and so on are who is actually supplying that product to the customer. So if you want to make that relationship cleaner, then the best way is to probably get rid of the middle person who's charging the customer 5-10% and then charging you 37%. And then customers think, why am I being mugged off here? Because they never know the truth. So, yeah, I think we can leave that one there. You happy with that? You finished it all there?
Yeah.
And happy to come on again if we have any more developing news on that issue?
Yeah, I mean, I love aggregators. I follow their stories quite closely. I like different like business models and how they intend to make a profit. Deliveroo was always an interesting one because they're up against a lot of the big boys and they want to be a big player. And to be fair, they classified themselves as hyper local, so they started with local neighborhoods and being very local. But it's gone national, and it's I think they're finding it tough.
Yeah,
and I like business stories in general, as you know, Stel.
No, we all do. Yeah, I love them too. So, next topic, climate crisis and crime. A perfect storm brews in the olive oil industry. Summary of the article. Essentially, the climate and crime, but there's a few other issues, have sort of had a knock-on effect with the production cycles of olive oil. And because of that, there's less olive oil. And when there's less olive oil, but still a certain figure that needs to be delivered, there's crime and lots happening, whether it's adulteration and so on, or theft. Why did you find this article interesting, Zoe?
Okay, so the reason I found this article interesting is because it reminded me of an interview that Bill Gates gave a while ago, talking about commodities in general, about how he thought everyone should own a piece of land and cultivate some food themselves. And he did go on to say that theft in commodities will be higher in the future. And this kind of touched upon that. And I remember thinking about another book that I read about how water was traded as a commodity and how it was being stolen just to survive. So I think in this day and age where inflation is high, I mean, we're getting a lot of climate crisis stories. There's been wildfires throughout Europe. There's been heavy flooding in some parts. Olive oil is just another commodity that's hit the food market where it's going through a tough process, but it's having a tough time clawing its way back to normality.
I think there's been a few issues with olive oil, though. There's been disease for the trees, and Italy's not a major producer anymore. Greece has had some issues. Spain's had some issues with this disease, and nobody knows how to treat it. It's like a fungus that attacks the tree, and then the tree just dies. So that's been lifting up olive oil prices for some time. And then, for me, like adulteration happens in all oil, edible oil. It happens in all oil, but it happens a lot in edible oil markets too. And a lot of people probably don't realize how prevalent it is. So the only reason people care is because olive oil is a premium product. No one probably cares when it's, I don't know, sunflower oil or rapeseed oil. Although it's less likely to happen because they're cheaper oils anyway. So I think where anything has value, whether it's perceived or not, then you will see crime. I think you're always going to see that.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's kind of like a perfect storm for thieves because everything's happened at once, and like you said, it's pushed the price up, which has made it more a commodity that's in demand, so they can get more money for it. So it's
Well,
everything's happened at once. See,
well, thieves don't operate in a vacuum. They've got a buyer, so people are buying it. So they're, so yeah, in a way, the average person is pushing up the price of these things because they end up buying these things, and then it ends up getting stolen, and then the price goes up. So it's sort of like a virtuous circle that, well, not so virtuous.
would you say regulation is a problem? Do you think it needs to be regulated so that only the producers can get out onto the market? Is there a black market for olive oil?
There must be. Like if £300,000 worth of oil went missing, then there must be going somewhere. I'm not 100% whether that was adulterated or stolen. Actually, no, it was theft. So they're selling that, and you'd be surprised. They're actually probably just going to local restaurants and selling it. My dad's house in Cyprus has got a few olive oil trees, and he presses them. Well, he did before what happened to him, but he'd get them pressed at a local olive oil mill, and then whatever he didn't want, he'd go and sell to a local restaurant, 20 litres at a time. So restaurants in these countries are used to buying like that. It's probably an upgraded version of bartering, but my dad might have got 80 euros for like 20 litres of fresh olive oil. And they know my dad. So why wouldn't they buy it off you or me if they knew us? So if you're turning up with 300,000 euros, if you were to sell 300,000 euros of stolen olive oil in one go, yes, that would raise some eyebrows. But if you're driving around a little village in Greece or Italy or Spain, and you're just going to the local tapas restaurant, and you're like, hey, do you want to buy some? Yeah, okay. and that's where that's probably what's happening, and that's what I mean. It's a virtuous cycle, and I think or again, a non-virtuous cycle, because it fuels more theft. They wouldn't buy it if it wasn't they wouldn't buy it off the thieves if it wasn't so expensive. But then the price has to go up because it's being stolen. So if they probably stopped buying the product in question, so let's say olive oil, if they stopped buying it from the thieves and said no, that market would dry up. They'd stop stealing it, and then you could argue the price could come down to the shops. This is the problem.
I mean, I would say regulation is the cure there, but you're saying that it would still happen.
But I do think it is heavily regulated. I think olive oil, especially in Europe, is heavily regulated. But there's ways for this to, where there's a will, there's a way. You've got to only cast your mind back to a few years ago when we had the horse meat scandal in the UK. And do you know where that originated from?
That was France, wasn't it?
No, that's where they found it. It actually originated from Cyprus. Yeah. And what happened was, there was a guy in Cyprus that was buying donkeys and horses from Romania because the law changed and said they can't use horses and donkeys as working animals. Yeah. So what did they do with those animals? They killed them, froze them, and then they got to Cyprus and entered the European food chain. Yeah. And then they got, right, whether they physically went, I don't know, whether they physically went. However, the labeling was from Cyprus, and they got labeled as beef. Yeah. And that's how then it came to the UK as, well, not just UK, France and so on, as beef. So it's such a complex thing. And this is probably one of the downsides with free movement of trade within the European Union, because once it enters the European Union, it then gets stamped as an EU product. So if you go to the countries that, let's say, are the newest in, so at that time it was Cyprus, Romania, a lot of these countries, well, you could argue they don't know the laws that well, or you could argue that they don't want to know the laws that well. Yeah, yeah, whichever it may be. And the system gets broken, and
Yeah.
from
Well, I
my
mean, in the example you've just given there, regulation has failed because what would have happened is it would have been stamped as beef and it should have been checked as beef, but it hasn't been checked as beef.
yeah,
So
because
regulation, in my
as
instance, what I'm saying is the cure has failed.
yeah, because once it had that EU stamp, everyone was like, this doesn't need checking. It has the stamp of approval.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I do think that that could be a weak point as opposed to a plus point. Now, what should have happened there is someone should have been at those factories, let's say, and let's assume for a moment that nothing turned up and the certificates or stamps were being sent to Romania. Then the inspector could have said, well, where's the meat? Oh, well, we're sending it to somebody. Well, you can't do that. That's against the law, and that way it would have been a deterrent. Look, where there's money, there is an incentive to hide things. That's a fact. Luckily, within our industry and in the UK, there is the National Edible Oils Association, which is NEODA, or Distributors Association, which is NEODA, and that does have a lot of big companies. But I don't know at what lengths they go to check the product. I am a member of NEODA, so I should know. I could ask the question.
They do random checks on products, packaging, sizing. But I'm sure they test the product once it comes into the processing facility in the UK.
Yeah, maybe. But you always have oil issues.
They must do because that's their job as NEODA.
Yeah, I'd have to ask. I can ask Gary Lewis, who's the president, and not to name drop or anything, he's just a good guy. But he'd know. And he knows everything about oil and fats. Like, there's nothing he doesn't know. So it'd be interesting to know. But the fact is, where there is value, there is theft. So,
but do you think? Sorry, go on. Finish
go on.
Do you? I mean, in your example of pressing olive oil and selling it to local restaurants, that wouldn't happen in the UK.
Well, why can't it?
Olive oil isn't done in the UK.
It doesn't happen with olive oil, but it happens with rapeseed oil. So there's lots of farmers that would cold press rapeseed oil and take it to a local market. They may not go door to door to restaurants, or they may, but they'd go to a local market and sell it as cold pressed rapeseed oil.
Okay, you just quashed my my argument there.
No, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that wouldn't happen in the UK because palm comes from another country, but you've just mentioned rapeseed, and that is grown in this country.
I can't think of what's cheaper than rapeseed other than soybean oil. Now, whether they do that, but in England there is a labelling legislation. You have to say what's in the product. So. So, for example, people don't realise that vegetable oil is it's really not made from vegetables. It's made from rapeseed and rapeseed oil and soybean oil. And so if you go to a Booker's Cash and Carry, you can see you've got rapeseed oil, groundnut oil, soybean oil, but then you've got vegetable oil. Now, why is vegetable oil called vegetable oil? And it's got corn and it's got vegetables on the packet. Well, you're not making vegetable oil from carrots. It's just not happening. So what's happening is it's a market-driven product. So because it's called vegetable oil, you can actually, without changing the ingredients, you can change what oil is inside, as long as it says a blend of oils. Yeah. So it can be soybean oil, and the most popular is a blend of soybean oil and rapeseed oil. And as the market for soybean oil goes up, they put more rapeseed oil. And when soybean drops, they put more soybean. So oil, that is. So that's a product that is not a consistent product by design, but it's not meant to be. It's meant to be a cheap frying oil. And a lot of people don't realize that changes all the time. So one thing we see a lot of when people message us and say, especially from like the food service side, I just use vegetable oil. We'll say to them, look, that's not a consistent product because it's always changing. It's always in flux because it goes with the markets. So if corn oil has a massive drop, they'll add loads of corn oil to it. So it's never the same. So a lot of people don't realize that. Same with plant-based margarines. That will always change because it's a market-driven product. So, but if it says in England, if it says corn oil, if it says soybean oil, if it says what it is, it has to be that, you know? So otherwise you fall on the other side of the law, and that could get you into trouble too. Look, the whole labelling issue is interesting, but we do have some protection in the UK by the government and obviously NEODA, from what I understand. So, but it would be worth getting Gary on at some point to understand. You know, did you have any other concerns or thoughts about this article?
No, I was gonna bring it back to palm oil and the RSPO. But I think you touched upon it when you said rape and the fact that because it's grown here, it can happen here. But I don't think it could happen with palm because it's imported from another country, and no one would. Well, I guess you could import palm and sell it on the black market, but it's not likely because I'm sure you'd need a license to import palm. So
yeah, well, there's only 3 or 4 major importers of palm anyway. There's not many, but what happens in a huge vat of palm? We're probably all getting mixed, to be honest. Now, there's lots of vats. There's lots of these vats, so I won't worry too much about that. There is an article that we just wrote about that says that if there is any slavery or deforestation, the UK producers would not be able to import that. Now, that's okay if you've got RSPO, I think, because that covers both of those aspects. So
yeah, it covers it.
But you can see how that would put a limit on supply. However, what usually happens is that doesn't stop being sold. It will be used domestically, or it will go to another country that doesn't care. So, and that gives them access to cheaper palm, and we have to buy the more expensive stuff. So, again, that doesn't actually solve the problem. It just makes us a bit better. So,
yeah.
Another thing,
I think coming back to our first article about being a global leader.
Yeah, exactly. And Gary Lewis, to mention him again, he works for KTC, and he's quite high up in the oil department. And they brought out a single estate palm oil, so fully traceable and single estate. And I've kept my eye on that. I wonder if that's going to become more popular, because if you can trace it back to a single estate and then know exactly who grew it, what are the conditions like, do people get paid well, then that's not a bad thing. What I think one of the interesting...
A single estate, I mean, that's extremely... that would be extremely tough to do in terms of palm.
I don't know.
For palm, it would be... I mean, palm plantations are scattered around, but that would be extremely tough.
Yeah, but, if they're going to push the envelope forward, then they probably need to do stuff like this, because palm has a terrible reputation. Not all of it is earned, but it's a terrible reputation nonetheless. I think that palm has its place in the food industry. It needs to be in the food industry. It is not a bad product. Has it got a bad history? Possibly. But can it be better? Yes. People need to understand, all the people that get a bit crazy about palm oil, that palm trees yield 3 to 4 times more oil than any other oil-based product. Fact.
Yeah, I mean, we'd be lost without palm. It's the highest yielding veg oil.
Exactly.
It's we'd be lost without it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a quality product. It's highly saturated, so it's fantastic for frying. It's robust,
and we need to be looking at higher yielding products as well. I mean, to feed the global population, I think by 2050 it's going to reach 9.8 billion. We need to produce 60% more food. So, I mean, we need a way to get to that 60% level, and that is with high yielding products.
So the reason why a lot of old palm trees get cut down, or even relatively new but old species palm trees get cut down, is to make way for newer, fast-growing, higher-yielding palm trees. So, they're more resistant to pests. They grow faster. They need less water. And you can see why, if you're a forest owner, let's say, with palm, and you've got, I don't know, I'm guessing now, but let's say you've got 10 hectares of old trees. Well, when they start to become a bit, not producing what they need, well, let's get rid of them and put 10 hectares of faster growing trees with higher yielding, so that, that makes complete sense. So for me, I think palm has its place in the industry. I'm a supporter of palm, but obviously it needs to be all above board. People need to earn well off it. Before we go, have you ever heard of like the Rainforest Alliance and companies like that deal with like coffee and so on?
Yeah. So they partner with a lot of local coffee roasters, don't they?
I'm not sure if it's Rainforest Alliance, but there is a wider story. And I did a podcast with a guy from a coffee company a few years ago, and he said there's one reason why he doesn't support some of those initiatives. And I don't want to say it's Rainforest Alliance because it might not be them. But he said the problem is the minimum wage soon becomes the maximum wage. Yeah. He says, whereas him and people like McDonald's and so on pay a lot more for their coffee. So, but they guarantee that more money goes to the workers, that they get a higher wage. So let's say if someone's in one of these alliances, fair trade, I think it was fair trade he was talking about specifically. And he said, let's say on fair trade, someone gets $1 a day. Well, they would pay a lot more, but they guarantee that someone gets $2 a day, Now that may not sound like a lot sitting in the UK, but in wherever...
Oh, no, I know what you mean, yeah. Back there, it means a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So he said that's one of the problems that he finds, and they don't have a lot of access to education, whereas they force them to go school. That can have an unintended effect too, because most people probably don't want to go to school. So yeah, but
that's maybe similar to the RSPO style. So they educate the people where they work and build schools, and they help in just the community environment as well as producing sustainable palm. Yeah. So I think that's very, very admirable that they do that. It's part of a sustainability approach that I think a lot of businesses need to take on board.
Yeah, no, I agree. And especially with these, it's different with olive oil, just to go back there and link it, because olive oil makes the growers very, very wealthy. Whereas, well, actually, maybe it's the same. I was going to make a point, but if you're growing cocoa and cocoa beans, coffee beans, maybe it's not the same. But I need to do more research. But I'd imagine that the growers of that product do well as well, and the workers probably don't do very well on the whole. But olive oil, it's a commodity that is very, very lucrative. So I think that's probably what makes it slightly different. But yeah, I think I always try, to buy recognised products that have good accreditation. But luckily, olive oil doesn't affect the industry, so that's a good thing, I guess. But what's happening could happen to the other oils in the industry and have a knock-on effect there.
Yeah. Supply and demand.
Yeah, no, massively. Well, so we've come to the end of this, my friend, and thank you for your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We'll talk again soon, mate.
Sure, we'll speak soon.
I enjoyed recording this episode of Reading the News with Zohaib Hussain. What did you think about the topics we covered? Let us know your thoughts. If you want to keep in the loop of what we're doing, then you should be following us on social media, but like we said before, to get exclusive offers and the latest news delivered to your inbox, join our mailing list. The link will be in the episode show notes. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends in the industry. If you liked it, then they may like it too.